Now, Keener tells us that perhaps the sphere that weighs testimony most deliberately is that of the courts, right? And so because of the stakes involved, legal approaches to testimony tend to reflect vigorous discipline and are applicable to the matters that we're talking about here. Excuse me. And thus, he tells us that some statisticians cite against Hume the work of the mathematician Charles Babbage, right? He was in late 1700s, 1800s. Now, he's the originator, Keener tells us, of the modern computer, right? And so regarding witnesses, this is what Babbage has to say. Where a significant number of witnesses agree without prior collusion, an event's probability increases sufficiently to overturn any biases against it, right? So if you have a number of witnesses, several witnesses, so that's one, component, I guess we might say, in the calculation. So you have a number of witnesses, right? A significant number is what he says, and they all agree on a particular happening of an event, and there was no collusion before you talked with them, then he suggests that an event's probability increases sufficiently to overturn any bias against it, even if I haven't experienced it. Right? And so there's a criteria that he gives us to evaluate the value of testimony, right? Eyewitness testimony. And so, in fact, Keener tells us that Babbage formulated his mathematical critique directly against Hume. Right?
So what you're watching this on is direct evidence of being against Hume. So you're welcome. This is great. Yeah. So think about a bank robbery, right? So you could say maybe that the bank teller who's held up has some bias that would cause her to point the finger only at one person. But if you have a customer in there as well who was in the same building but not directly in the line of fire or at the point of the gun, well, then that adds weight to the teller's testimony. And if they're all agreeing that John Doe is the person who held up the bank, you add the security guard and the delivery driver and all these different people who are a part of it. There's no collusion. It's independent witnesses to themselves and a significant number. And there's no collusion. They're told not to talk to each other. That's a big stickler for courts. In fact, if collusion is found between even the questioner and the witness, it's thrown out as prejudicial. So this is something that we view as some of the highest priority, unless you have, direct computer video evidence pointed directly at it. Some of the best type of evidence that you are going to get is direct eyewitness, people who were there, who were involved, who are able to be questioned from both perspectives and hold up under that criteria is sometimes even more beneficial than just a static video camera. So this is something that Hume almost doesn't allow, and Babbage took advantage of to here. And so you're consuming the technology based on Hume. So I guess we could be grateful for Hume. So it may be a slight miracle in and of himself right there. Well, already in Hume's day, it was clear to some that he failed to take in adequate account for the confluence of multiple independent and reliable witnesses increases the probability of testimony's accuracy. In the case of multiple independent witnesses, one no longer requires extraordinary proof to secure a probability against prior improbabilities. If Hume's challenge against individual testimony was in some respects questionable, he did not even address the force of multiple testimonies, which seriously changes the probability calculus. So
the claim here is that Hume didn't even take into consideration, multiple testimonies about a particular thing, right? And it's almost as if he dismissed them here, and that's the issue here that he's trying to point out. Right. And of course, Babbage is suggesting that multiple testimonies with regard to an incident adds credibility to the possibility, the probability that the event happened.
Right. Which is something, if it's miracles, right? The accounts in both the Old and New Testament, the Bible in totality, you should realize that there is at least some evidence of multiple eyewitnesses. At the very least, the four Gospels themselves are independent in of themselves eyewitnesses. Now, you can definitely critique that. But to say, well, one guy was happening along and he saw the resurrected Jesus and went off on his merry way and didn't interact whatsoever, and that's what all Christianity hangs its hat on. I mean, that's never that's never been the case. Paul's challenged to go to all the apostles and to the 500 and to himself last. All these people are claims of independent multiple eyewitnesses. So this is something that Hume should have taken into account into his argument, but he just doesn't seem to.
Yeah. And so he tells us that for miracles, and he's going to, talk more about this here, this particular issue, and presupposes a standard of proof so high that any evidence is effectively ruled out in advance. So that is, Hume so frames his position that he renders it unfalsifiable and therefore not tenable for public discourse by traditional standards of logic. And unfortunately, Keener tells us this heads I win, tails you lose form of argument remains popular even today, even with respect for miracles.
Right, exactly. All right, well, what about rejecting unusual and rare events? Well, Hume cites the uniform experience of modern people, of course it's got to be modern people, against miracles. So
modern people are the Hume and his buddies, I guess.
Right. Which is almost ironic because in today's world they're seen as very almost Luddites, head stuck in the sand, backwards thinking people that don't have the ability to photocopy their books or even have running toilets. So modern people tend to change with modern advancement, I guess. Well, as Keener has noted, Hume implies that he uses the inductive approach characteristics of empiricism, yet ruling out new evidence on the basis of supposed uniform experience is hardly inductive. Scholars identify various problems with his approach, and far from the spirit we normally associate with intellectual inquiry, a priori rejection of all these claims declare victory by fiat rather than by fair exploration. Again, if you're going to write the rules and you say, bring me a miracle, and you throw out all evidence for miracles, I mean, that's an easy win. So it doesn't seem like we're doing any good with bringing our evidence before Hume. It's almost like you're casting pearls before swine. If I'm probably the first person to coin that term, and so maybe we shouldn't do that. So that's what would come to expect from Hume.